Ex Nihilo. Talking to
Okay. Dear Graham Majin, we're very much looking forward to today's conversation focusing on a rather sensitive topic, namely how the boomers have brought about an institutional decline, particularly in journalism and the classical notions of truth. And, it's a definite delicate conversation because you're talking with two elderly gentlemen from this age group. But regardless of that, we tend to agree with everything you've said in this very readable book of nearly 500 pages entitled Truthophobia. But before delving into that, a few words about you. You've worked in TV journalism for over 20 years, including 14 years at the BBC News, where you covered current affairs while making documentaries. And you've even set up your own production company. And for several years now, you've been teaching at Bournemouth University, instructing students in the art of documentary making. Tell us, what prompted you, as a child of this media world, to criticize journalism's current state, one which you've presented to the House of Lords, no less?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I criticize journalism because I love it, and I don't like to see the way it's changed. I think journalism has changed profoundly in the last 60 to 70 years, and I think journalism is in one hell of a mess. There are innumerable studies and opinion polls and surveys that show declining audience trust in journalism in the UK, in the United States, in Germany and France, across the Western world. And we see a corresponding rise in alternative journalism. I call it official and unofficial journalisms. And, why is that happening? Well, I think the two phenomena are intimately related. I think as trust declines in official mainstream media, people look elsewhere for the information they feel they're not getting. So we're in this kind of world where narrative seems to rule journalism. And it's a mess, and it reflects the society that we seem to be living in, which is increasingly polarized. People are not talking to each other. People not capable or don't even want to talk to other people with different views. So I think we're in one hell of a mess, and that's why I criticize journalism, because I love it. I feel that I love the truth, the idea of the truth. Not everyone does. I think when I was younger, I thought, well, of course, everyone wants the truth. Everyone loves truth. Now I'm, a little bit older. It slowly dawns on me, maybe the majority of people do not want the truth. They want something else. They want to have their pre-existing ideas confirmed. They want to agree with people around them. They want to sort of signal, do some sort of social signaling. So I think that's at the root of it. I think is my love of truth.
Well, there's something like a special incident which made you write this book, Truthophobia.
No, there's no single incident. I think the trigger was probably my PhD. I did a PhD in journalism at the University of Kent, and that was all about. This is something perhaps we'll have time to get into. It was about
every time you would.
It was about what I call the dominant paradigm. I was kind of interested in why we as a society have the beliefs that we have. The ideology in German, I think it's the Weltanschauung.
Weltanschauung, yeah.
Weltanschauung, yeah. And I was fascinated by this because it's invisible. It's invisible to us. We can't see our own ideology. So someone said that ideology is like bad breath. Everyone, we can't. We can't. we can't tell we've got it, but we can tell if other people have got it. Oh, you've got an ideology. Yeah, but we all have an ideology. So I was really fascinated, and I started to kind of read in academic texts, and then I would look at the bibliography and see, well, where do they get their ideas from? And they'd be quoting academics and scholars and thinkers from 20 years ago. So I go to those texts and I'd look at their bibliography. Where did they get their ideas from? And they'd be quoting scholars from the 1970s or 80s. And where did they get their ideas? And it seemed to go down like a funnel to fewer and fewer people. And then you end up with people in the sort of, inevitably in the 60s, Lacan, Althusser, Horkheimer, critical theory, but quite but it kind of seems to come from there if you follow it back. So my PhD examined the roots of this. In fact, I went back to Fichte.
Ah, yeah, the I and non-I.
Yeah, and this kind of extreme subjectivism. I tried to examine the roots of it, and then I thought, well, if you look at these ideas critically, which I did, I thought none of them make any sense. It's all wrong. And I thought, so the bigger question for me was, well, why did people start to believe in it? And that was the question. And so I finished my PhD, and then after it, there was this other question. Why and when did everyone start to believe in this stuff, which a generation earlier, no one believed in?
Yeah.
And so that led me to say, well, this is when it happened, and I think it's generational.
Yeah.
It was something that the baby boomers did. The baby boomers changed everything. They changed music, hairstyles. Not that I'm kind of jealous about hairstyles.
No, but they did. Yeah,
they did. Fashion. I mean, morality, the views on sex, rock and roll, blah, blah. They changed everything. And they changed journalism as well. So that was the idea for the book.
In your book, you repeatedly revisit the philosophical concept of truth, or aletheia, how it has fallen behind in the conflict with the moral economy, or arete. A few years ago, in an article for Lecture, I caught myself making the grim observation that a sham economy has been established where beauty was replaced by kitsch, truth by bullshit, and goodness by moral grandstanding. While we could cite Colin Crouch's post-democracy here, the crucial question is, how did this come about? You say that it has to do with how the boomers growing up in television land, developing a worldview which Oscar Wilde described as sentimentalist, one who desires to have the luxury of an emotion without paying for it. In journalism, the price would be the truth, and nothing but the truth, wouldn't it? How could this idiosyncrasy, which you named Truthophobia, develop?
Yeah, well, that's a kind of great question. I love your Oscar Wilde quote, and I think for me, it's about trying to identify what it is about the baby boomer generation that had that irresponsible nature, because I think that's what you're describing when your quote, the Oscar Wilde sentimentalist, someone who wants something but doesn't want to pay for it. That's irresponsible. So it's also immature. The idea that you can get a free lunch, so I think the roots of that kind of truthophobia. The idea that there are no consequences to things that we do, I think it's generational. That was my conclusion. And something happened with that generation. I think it was to do with the growing up in affluence and an era of peace, and just the fact that it was an enormous cohort, the fact it was a boom. And that meant, because in the book I refer to this concept of the vortex of immaturity, the idea that you get so many young people that they dominate and their ideas dominate, and they believe that their ideas and their feelings, their emotions, their intuition is objectively correct. But they were experiencing in the 1960s was immaturity, because they were young. Of course they were young, you can't deny that. And they created this enormous force, this enormous ideology, and then imposed it on the world. And I think we're kind of suffering from this irresponsibility, this denial of reality, because if you look at young people, I explain this in the book, and if we try and define, well, what is immaturity? What are these qualities? There's this idea that you want to gratify your desires instantly. You want everything. You want everything now. You don't want to wait. You're not interested in the past or the future. A bit like a child who wants 10 ice creams.
Yeah,
I want
exactly.
one.
I can get no satisfaction.
It's all about it's all there in the songs. That's absolutely right. I can't get no satisfaction. And if you, and of course the kind of anthem, I think the most famous boomer anthem is John Lennon's Imagine. Imagine. So it's all about, let's imagine a fantasy. Let's imagine a utopia. Imagine all the people living for today. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope one day you'll join us and the world will be as one. And that, there's a lot in there. Apologies for the singing.
No.
But there's a lot in there, because that was the generation's anthem, really, and there are lots of other.
L'imagination au pouvoir, is it? Like
yes.
The imagination to power, which is like the big battle cry of the French students.
Yeah, well, very much, and we can talk about 1968. I think you probably know more about that, can't you? The 68 ans than I do, but if we look at those lyrics briefly, it's all about imagining. It's not about reality. It's very utopian. You may say I'm a dreamer. Well, he doesn't deny it. He says, yeah, but I'm not the only one. We're all dreamers. We're a generation of dreamers. And and I hope you're going to join us, and then the world will be as one. I find that quite sinister. I hope one day you will join us. We will be as one. I don't want to. I mean, suppose you don't want to join. Suppose you say, So, I think you're right to pick out kind of popular culture and music, because all the clues are there, hiding in plain sight.
How did you, by the little question, how did you develop like a personal reluctance for being incorporated into this one? So was it like a background wise, like family wise? What was the the backstory?
Okay, well, I think you're just born that way. I mean, I kind of think a person, I do. I think we are, as a species, we've evolved to be individuals. It helps us survive. We're not all the same. That's just a fact. We are different, not just as individuals, but I think as personality types. I sometimes say to people, I could ask you this question. Imagine a herd of animals. Imagine you're a sheep or a cow or something, and there's a herd of animals. Where are you standing? Are you in the middle, or where are you? I'll ask you that question.
I'm always on the periphery.
Everybody is imagining himself at the top.
No.
Well, Martin, you're at the top, but
I'm on the periphery.
The funny thing is,
yes.
The funny thing is, I was kind of although being growing up in this generation, never felt part of it, which was maybe one of the reasons why I could be very critical, about it. But it's very strange, you're right, I would say.
Yeah, well, just two things. I mean, well, first of all, the reason you don't feel part of it is because, contrary to what you said at the beginning, you are not baby boomers. And we can have a big discussion about demographics, but for me, the baby boomers, if you want the kind of natal years, it's 1940 to 1955. I don't think you're
57. I'm
57 or 56.
Well, you're not a baby boomer. I mean, it's not. Yeah, we can argue
the tail, so to speak.
Well, I'm the same. I'm 1962, and I feel like you, that I arrived at the party when it was finished. Everyone was kind of going home.
Yes.
I'm here now, yeah, but it's finished. So I think, yeah, we're just a different generation. We were not young when the Beatles, we weren't 18, 19 in 1964, 5, that kind of Rudi Dutschke era, So that's one reason. But going back to my other point about the herd, I'm like you. I'm just not I'm not comfortable being in the herd. I want to be away from the herd, on the periphery, kind of watching where the herd's going. And that's just the way I am. And that's personality, I think.
Yeah, well, and it's curious. I mean, because we're talking about all this, and it was a big change, and it's left a big hangover. I mean, it's just a hangover that you still see playing out in Gen Z. So, and you give us this very practical exemplar of how this happened in this journalist, John Birt, who I'd never heard of before. But he serves as the Director-General of the BBC from 1992 to 2000. And he did everything in his power to eliminate what you call the classic bystander journalism and enthroned the social justice journalist, predecessor of today's activism journalism. He accomplished this by adopting a very strange practice at the BBC, which, without wanting to be too harsh on him, could be viewed as an ideological masturbation machine. Narratives were first scripted in the office, then the cameramans were sent out to film imagery that fit these scripted narratives, which raises the simple question of how did the journalists turned into such cue givers or worse puppets of such self-fulfilling prophecies react to this? Why did they tolerate such a restriction on their art in the first place?
Yeah. Well, this gets to the heart of what is wrong with modern journalism, or what is modern journalism? How is it different? I mean, I call it boomer journalism because the baby boomers created it, and John Birt at the BBC, which is the world's largest news organization, he was a key figure. And let's just back up. And John Birt, he's a classic kind of baby boomer, born in 1944. That's the same year as Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, Roger Daltrey of The Who, Jeff Beck. He's born the same year. He's very much. If you read his autobiography, and his autobiography is kind of fascinating. And when I read it, I thought, why is he admitting to these things? Why is he admitting?
There is an eroticism in the stories you told about him and Mick Jagger and Marianne Faithfull.
Well, there is a bit of that, yeah. There's a line about that when he was rubbing up against. He explains Marianne Faithfull in a helicopter, but that's just a little thing. But I was wondering why is he admitting to destroying journalism and destroying the concept of truth and turning journalism on its head at the BBC? And then I realised, no, he's not admitting his guilt. He's boasting. He's proud. He's proud that he did this, that he transformed journalism, he transformed the whole thing. But the old journalism, and I call it kind of classical Victorian liberal journalism, it was developed in England in the early to mid 19th century. The Times newspaper is the famous example, where they started to be impartial, and they turned their back on the older form, which was, very, very, very tribal, very partisan. And so I call it classical Victorian journalism. And it was about kind of based on the scientific method of the Enlightenment. And it was, how can we find the truth? It was this idea of we've got to try and find the truth. How can we do that? It's really extremely difficult. Well, let's be scientific. We're going to separate facts from opinions. And the facts, like a scientist, we will try and report those facts as accurately as humanly possible. The opinions, yes, we will have strong opinions, but we will put those in the editorial pages, the editorial columns. And then the facts will inform our opinions. John Birt changed that. Not just John Birt. I mean, it was kind of, I accuse the baby boomer generation of changing journalism. You can see it in the underground journalism of the 1960s and 70s. That their idea of journalism, they didn't want this dry, dull, fact-led journalism. They wanted, they were angry, they were immature, they wanted change, they wanted social, they wanted to change the world and make it a better place for themselves. So the way they did that was they basically reversed journalism's arrow. Instead of this arrow that leads from fact to opinion, they switched it round. So they start off with narrative or opinion, let's call it narrative. And then you go out and you get the facts that confirm the narrative. So that's what John Birt did. He called it the mission to explain. That was the name he gave it. And and in fairness to the BBC, this was happening all over the place. But I picked on the BBC because it's, I think, a very, very good example of what happened. And how did he do it? Well, he brought in senior journalists to kind of shape the narrative. They're like priests of the narrative. I call them the kind of aristocrats of journalism. So I call them journocrats. Very highly paid editors and correspondents who kind of, from the top down, dictate the narrative, and then the humble, ordinary journalists, people like me. When I was there, I was only at a relatively low level. I used to produce the evening news for London and the southeast area. Your job is just to go and collect the information, find the stories. And if you find stories that don't fit the narrative, then they will either not get into the news or they'll be just very small and played down. So this is called, this is referred to as agenda setting and framing, these kind of media theories of. But with your question, sorry, this is a very long answer. Thank you.
No.
But
It's important.
Your specific question is, well, why didn't journalists rebel against?
Because that was the sense of the whole youth was rebellion against authorities. How did such a autocratic, like top-down logic evolve?
Yeah. So, well, they did at the beginning. And John Birt in the 1970s, 1975 and 1976, published a kind of manifesto for his revolution of journalism. And that was published in the Times newspaper when he was a young producer. And that was fiercely mocked and ridiculed by older journalists. But by the time 1992, John Birt becomes Director-General, by the time the baby boomer come into power, those older journalists, they're retiring. They're not there. So it's about demographics. The baby boomers are in positions of power. So why didn't the younger journalists, or the journalists of John Birt's era, why didn't they complain? Well, they didn't want to complain. They thought it was great. They thought it was really good. Yeah, let's change the world, because that's the whole point. It wasn't just John Birt. John Birt is not some evil genius. He simply reflected the zeitgeist, the Weltanschauung, the values of his era. And he said, well, we need journalism needs to change, and he changed it. So he's not a baddie in that sense. He's a hero for the baby boomers for changing journalism. But I've got one story from my own experience, just to finish off, if I may, because this is a real thing. This narrative-led journalism today, it's real. And I was talking a few years ago to a friend of mine who's quite a senior level journalist at BBC TV in the news. This was in 2019. There's a general election here in the UK, and he was sent to one of the northern industrial towns. I think it was Bolsover. I may be wrong, but Bolsover is an old traditional coal mining town in the north of England, where traditionally it's always Labour, kind of socialist Labour. It's been that way for a long, long time. And in London, they sent him to do a report for the BBC News on how Bolsover was going to vote Labour. Okay. That's the narrative. He goes there and he starts interviewing people and talking to people. And he finds that people are angry with Labour and they're going to vote Conservative.
Ah, yeah.
He calls the news editor in London and says, this isn't this isn't true. They're not going to vote Labour. I think Bolsover could go to the Conservative, which is kind of big news story because it's a safe, Labour socialist seat. And he was told, no. It's already in the running order. We've got people reporting from these different parts of the country. Your job from Bolsover is to report that this is, Labour. It's going to be Labour. And, look, we've got a news programme to put out. We haven't got, the deadline is coming up,
Oh, my God.
Don't tell me you're not going to do it or can't do it. So he said, no, fine. No, that's fine. So he did what the narrative demanded, the agenda set in London. That's just one tiny example. Guess what? In the general election, Bolsover flipped over from Labour to Conservatives. He was very angry. He told me in the pub. He said, I told them, they wouldn't listen. Well, tiny example, but it's a real thing, this narrative that we have, where there's a narrative of who's good, who's bad, it's a fantasy, it's a fairy tale.
I remember, I was a young man. I was working for a department in the German public radio, etc. They gave me all these freedoms I would have. But if somebody would have said to me, okay, like you, for example, I went to South Africa, and the public radio would pay everything, etc. But if somebody would have said to me, okay, so you have to write this and that, I would have rebelled like crazy. But I recall another story because I was I went to Berlin in '83, etc. I was really interested in all these stories of the young authors in Prenzlauer Berg, in the east part of Berlin, etc. Be in the separated city, and you go over, and then you would meet all these guys. But I couldn't find anybody wanting to publish my findings because it was not fitting into this wonderful they got a wonderful social experiment going on there. So because you would get these guys, and these stories were sordid and dark, and they were crazy in many ways, and nobody wanted to hear. That's true. In this respect, I saw it coming, but not as editors pushing me into certain directions.
Yeah, well, the narrative-led news is very dangerous. I mean, the example I've given you is really trivial. It's almost quite funny, but it's a personal story. Yeah. The danger of narrative, it is quite serious because when we talk about narrative, we're talking about these kind of tribal stories or myths. I mean, another way of answering your question about why journalists accept it is because there's a culture. When you join an organization as a journalist, you accept the culture. That's normal in any institution. And you accept the narratives and you don't question them. And that process is, to me, semi-religious. A kind of community, a tribe has its stories, and it operates, to me, in a kind of religious way.
Liturgical.
If you question... If you start to question the narratives, what are you? You're a heretic. You're a heretic. Why are you questioning the narratives? And these narratives are usually they're very simplified stories of right and wrong, good versus evil, and it's very dangerous when you get. I don't really want to talk about politics because I'm not. It's not something I do, and there are lots of clever people who do politics. It's not really my thing, but it does become political, and you can't see the complexity. It's very dangerous when you stop seeing the complexity of life, and you just see the world in these very, very simple ways.
When we talk about the cultural rift which emerged at the end of the 60s. Couldn't we say, along with Christopher Lasch, that something like a culture of narcissism was spreading? Lasch aptly described this as a nihilistic movement. People who've lost their inner compass create an enemy image, while simultaneously invoking a malicious superego ideology meant to punish the fantastical enemy. Isn't this the agenda that characterizes activist journalism, where the roles are clearly defined? You fight against social inequality, a supposedly rotten system, where you always find yourself on the right side. But of course, reality is really shades of grey, which can be really unsettling. Would you agree with that? That's the problem.
Yes, I would. I think that's a great analysis. This is what I mean by the danger of narrative, and it becomes tribal. I mean, the logic is very simple.
Yeah.
The logic is that if I'm right, and all my group is right, then people who disagree with me, they must be wrong. And when it becomes tribal, they're not just wrong, they're bad. I mean, if I'm good, not just right, but if I'm good, my motives are good, I want to change the world, make it a better place, I want to fight for social justice, I want to take the side of the oppressed against the oppressor. If I know all that, I somehow have faith in my beliefs, and all my group, my tribe have the same beliefs, then if you have a different view, then you must be bad, you must be evil. It just becomes very, very tribal. And there was, again, historically in the 16th and 17th century in Europe, people were killing each other for this reason and burning each other. You know, you're a Catholic, you're a Protestant, you're a Lutheran, you're a witch, you're in league with Satan, and we're going to burn you. This massive intolerance. So the narrative is a very, very dangerous drug because it fits in with tribalism. It fits in absolutely with intolerance. And it leads to violence. And that's how things are settled in the end, I think, if you're intolerant. I mean, another thought, really, another way of looking at this is if you zoom out and take the very big picture of history, this is normal. This tribalism, this violence, this intolerance, it's completely normal. It's for thousands of years. That is how humans and other apes have behaved. There have been chimpanzee studies, you know. So what we see in history are very short periods throughout history. We could perhaps point to Athenian Athens, and of course, closer to our era, the European and Anglo-American Enlightenment, when people said, stop, you know, is there an alternative to tribalism, to narrative, and to intolerance? Is there something else, or are we just doomed forever? And the way out was, well, what about trying to restrain those impulses? Let's restrain it using our reason. Let's restrain all of that. And in journalism, that was reflected in this impartial journalism. Well, is there another side to the argument? Let's hear the other side and let's follow the facts. Let's not be led by our impulses and our faith and our passion and our emotion. I want to change the world and make it a better place. I'm going to fight against these horrible oppressors. You're evil oppressors, and you're good, you're nice, oppressed. You know? So yeah, I feel really, if I'm being a little bit gloomy, it feels that we're coming to the end of that period of the Enlightenment, and we're
Max Horkheimer, whom you quote, he had found a wonderful expression for this. He talked about the erotic resentment.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
He was analyzing the days of Savonarola, like Florence of the 15th century, and he said he wanted to understand why a society getting into proto-capitalism got so backward, regressive, and the phrase he found is erotic resentment, group building, by resentment.
Yeah, well, certainly you kind of see that. I think you mentioned Marcuse, didn't you? Who
yes.
who again sort of talked about the kind of sexual side of it. It's, but yeah, I mean, I think, in fact, in my book at the end, I talk about the pornification of news, because I think, I think you can argue that, what we're talking about is the opposite of civilization, isn't it? We're talking about, what is it that separates human beings from the beasts, from the animals? And during the Enlightenment, that was a kind of big thing, that we were separate from the animals. We were superior. That's very unfashionable today. Very unfashionable view. But certainly, I think people in the 100 years ago, 200 years ago would have understood what you're saying, that we need to restrain those instincts and those urges, including sexual urges, and the boomers smashed all that. Sex, violence, rock and roll. Let it. We're not going to restrain anything. So there is something. There's something there. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're anticipating my next question here, which we'll get into much more deeply. The boomer psychogram, as you describe it, we found very accurate and not very flattering for our generation, because it is predominantly tribally oriented. It's groupthink. It's feeding primarily on the 60s promise of freedom and being exceptional, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, where everyone is unique. But isn't this a collective program of self-actualization manifested primarily through gestures of protest and anti-establishment sentiment, all through this hedonistic free pass of Herbert Marcuse's critical theory, where when facing a disturbing reality, you stick with Hegel? If facts don't agree with the theory, so much worse for the facts. Or as you quote Jefferson fuck Poland, who I'd never heard of before, says, if there's no good story, make one up. Doesn't this lead to the paradox that the very generation that always sees itself as this kind of punk anti-establishment suddenly loses itself in megalomania, which Horkheimer, Marcuse's mentor, was very concerned. He saw it as a Frankenstein-like bureaucratic monster. How did you experience this at the BBC?
Yeah, well, I think your analysis is absolutely right. But there's one thing I think we need to be clear about. I mean, part of the problem is that, we understand the world, and we understand the boomers from a lot of boomer literature, from reading boomer books. So it's really overdue, long overdue, to correct and to reassess the boomer generation, because the way they saw themselves and continue to kind of sell themselves is, everything was great. The world before 1960 or 1960, the Beatles' first album was like, the world before then was horrible. It was all racist and sexist. It was terrible. But now everything is just wonderful, because the boomers changed everything. Well, this is just a kind of mythology. Part of that, and just go pick you up on something you said, the boomer idea that everyone's unique. I don't think that's true. I think that's just part of their kind of, the kind of boomer propaganda. I think it's the opposite of that. It's the tribalism means, is this desire that everyone must be part of the boomer tribe, where, at the time, long hair, when everyone had short hair, different clothes, flared trousers, listening to boomer music. If you wanted to be unique, then if you wanted to have short hair and listen to, Mozart or something, that probably wasn't going to fit in. I go back to this idea. You mentioned Habermas, and in 1967, Rudi Dutschke, the boomer kind of extreme socialist German activist, was accused by Jürgen Habermas of a fascism of the left. And I think, that there is this type of, today everyone's a fascist, isn't it? So I don't like to overuse the word, but this kind of totalitarian intolerance, which is characteristic of fascism, I think, we see that in the boomer ideology. And I'll go back to this, this singing, I mean, there's another song. I don't know if you remember it's called the Hilltop commercial. It was massive for Coca-Cola.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I
of
recall
course.
this, yeah.
All young people on top of the hill. I'd like to buy the world.
Yep.
Yeah. And that became a hit single. They changed. They got rid of the commercial Coke stuff. And the New Seekers. But the words are the lyrics are interesting. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. And then the second verse, I'd like to see the world for once all standing hand in hand and hear them echo through the hills, oh, peace throughout the land. So it's lovely. We're all going to have peace. But if you look at the lyrics, it's, I want to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. The whole world.
Sure.
You will all. What does that mean? You will all sing the same song in the same key in perfect harmony. What the hell's that? I don't want to sing your song. I want to sing it in a different. I want to improvise. No. So there is this. It's kind of built in, I think, to that generation. So you say they saw themselves as kind of punk and rebelling. Well, I think,
But isn't that the interesting paradox built into it? I mean, it just fascinates, because we talk about this quite a bit. It's like this blind spot, this cognitive dissonance that's built into it. It's just fascinating to see it play out.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, the boomers were rebelling when it was useful for the boomers to rebel.
Exactly.
And when it wasn't, once they reached positions of power and authority, which they did in the 1990s, the John Birt era, they weren't very keen on rebellion anymore. In fact, it's like, you will not rebel. If you have a different view, you're going to be in trouble. So I think all of this boomer mythology has got to be. And it's great you're doing this on your podcast, but it's got to go. It's got to be challenged. Just your very specific question: how did I experience this at the BBC? I think in the way that journalism has changed, if you move away from truth in the way we've been discussing, so you have narrative first, and that leads you to the facts. This one-sided journalism. You get something which I refer to as pro-social lying, and cognitive psychologists.
White lies.
White lies, thank you. And I think that is a feature of modern journalism. Although I think that is so uncomfortable, I think journalists would probably not, they would not like to accept that. But it follows from, if you believe that you're righteous, you're moral, you're ethical, and you're going to, it's your job to, oppose Donald Trump or something like that because you think he's a bad person, then you will manipulate the facts. You will mislead in subtle ways. You will report certain things and you won't report other things. You won't be impartial. You won't give your audiences a balanced picture. You withhold information. And this falls into the category of pro-social lying to me, which is well-intentioned lying, where you say, well, yeah, look, it's important that we it's our duty to set a good kind of ethical political tone. And so I think that's how all of this gets reflected in the BBC, and not just the BBC. I'm not the enemy of the BBC. It's modern journalism. You see it all over the place. It's narrative led with pro-social lying.
In your book, you make this interesting reference to how a social shift alongside this generation's demographic dominance can explain the boomer phenomenon. John Kenneth Galbraith attributes this period of economic affluency to the sudden rise of the new consumer class, which, following Nietzsche, could be described as the last man. We've invented happiness, say the last human beings, and they blink. In a society of abundance, hedonism becomes the norm, and as a result, we slide into post-materialism and the attention economy. This is reflected in figures like Pierre Bourdieu, who gives it shape in his subtle distinctions. After first deconstructing Victorian liberalism in his text on television as capitalist sensationalism, he then makes it clear that certain voices must be excluded from the discourse, meaning he wants the privileged journocracy, as you call it, to fight the fantastical enemy. You see this as a return of Soviet journalism as propaganda in disguise. The question is, how do you protect truth from being distorted? And how do you make it clear to your students?
Well, the short answer is I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think there is an easy answer to that. I think it's a really, really tough question, because what I think you're asking me is, if you say, okay, we're going to tell everyone the truth. We're going to give everyone impartial news. How do you stop that kind of being weaponized? I think that's part of your question, and this is a tough question. It goes back a long way to Plato and the idea of a noble lie. And isn't it better that we kind of lie to people in their own interest? Look, I believe in the truth. I'm a fan of the truth, and I think it's the least worst option. If that's what you're asking me, if you're asking me if we were to move to a kind of truthful journalism, how do we prevent bad consequences of telling everyone the truth? I just think it's the least worst option. It's better than trying to protect people by lying.
But there's also like a psychological dimension in this moment of what John Kenneth Galbraith saw as the rise of the consumer. The consumer takes like a magic box, so to speak, from somewhere, a narrative or something, etc. So, but the other story would be, if you really enmesh with reality, like deal with something, etc. All of a sudden you see like shades of gray. You see like stuff is complex, stuff is very delicate, etc. And then you want to tell the truth because it's your experience. Like I would say, like as a journalist, when you drive somewhere to a distant place, etc., and you talk to people, and all of a sudden, like one astonishment follows the other. And then you say your story should be. You should not know beforehand what your story would be like. I mean, that's a lie, like right from the start. But I would say it's the lie of the consumer, is it? And the consumer says, okay, I know everything, like right from the start, because I take it from the shelf. The producer says, okay, I don't know. This wonderful saying of Samuel Beckett: I tried, I failed, I tried again, I failed better. Meaning, knowing beforehand that you are like destined to fail to a certain degree. The consumer does never have the feeling, because he's all about perfection. There's lots of different ways of analysing it. I mean, you mentioned my students. I'm teaching at the moment a unit on fake news and epistemology, and how do we know? And I use the example of VAR, virtual assistant referee, from football, because how does the referee know what's happening? He's just got two eyes, and you can't see everything on the football pitch. So we've got VAR, which is like 30 cameras, or 30 to 40 cameras at a big World Cup match or a Bundesliga match, Premier League. Yeah. So we can stop, and then the referee looks at the screen, and you've got all these different eyes. And so this is an attempt, this is how I explain it to students, this is an attempt to get closer to truth, to objective reality, to the objective truth, not just our subjective impressions. Because as you said, there are billions of individual stories. And then with the students, I kind of do this kind of big build up, and I say, so what is the answer? How can we get, perfect knowledge? How do we get objective knowledge? I do a big build up, and I ask them to think about it, and they not quite sure. And then I go to the next slide, and I say, we cannot. Humans do not have the ability. And I say, throughout history, the idea of an entity that does have perfect knowledge is the idea of God, who sees everything and knows the truth. We can't get it. We have never, we can't have certainty. The best we can get is a kind of
probability based on factual evidence. So yeah, it all comes down to epistemology.
Sure.
And humility, and I think that's what I want to see back in journalism, is epistemic humility, where we say we don't really know. These are the facts, and this is why we think these facts are reliable. And then from there, let's have some opinions. And you may have one opinion about that, but other people will have a range of opinions, and let people make up their own minds.
Yeah, but then there's this term I've learned from Martin Berger's Krieg. There is a certain education.
The Bürgerkrieg,
Yeah, we no longer have, that we've lost. The public needs to be educated so they can consume journalism, so that they can see the facts and make up their own minds about them. And we've lost that. It's quite problematic to me. Looking back on our boomer legacy, it hasn't been particularly awe-inspiring, particularly in how it's affected those following in our wake. How we see that the state has fallen victim to the boomers' march through the institution. And this applies not only to journalism, but equally to education, the energy industry, and pretty much everything else. When did you realize the boomer generation might be a cohort of involuntary demolition men?
Yes. Well, I think I've kind of preempted that one. I was talking earlier about my PhD. And I just wondered where we get our ideology from, the ideology which is invisible to us. And I went back to people like Ferdinand de Saussure and semiotics. These people are largely forgotten today, but 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, these were the intellectuals were all talking about semiotics and how language creates reality, phenomenology, Edmund Husserl. As I say, I went back to Fichte, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, and a French, Lacan, Louis Althusser, Michel Foucault, and this kind of massive denial of reality. I just thought that a lot of these people were completely crazy, and that what they were saying was just nonsense. So, literally with Lacan, someone like Althusser was psychotic and he murdered his wife. I mean, you're dealing with kind of a lot of crazy people. And I thought, Lacan, his biography is, he was a fraud and an imposter and so on. So the bigger question, as I said earlier, was well, why did an entire generation fall in love with these ideas? And it's because they were disruptive, and it was because they were useful. So I think the answer to your question is that these kind of ideologies, is all this intellectual stuff that we do and we kind of like, it follows instinct. The reason people are attracted to an ideology and it becomes popular is not because it's true or right, because it serves a purpose and it reinforces what they're feeling. So that was a kind of an insight. People don't read a book and say, oh, these ideas are amazing, I'm going to follow them. They already feel the ideas. And then when the book is written or they hear the idea, they say, that feels exactly right. Yeah. So that was really the moment I thought this is a generational thing. And all of this stuff I've been studying, all the philosophy and the intellectual history, it serves a purpose, and it served a purpose in the 60s and 70s and the 80s.
Many years ago, I wrote a book about the 68 Cultural Revolution, where my personal stance was, imagine there was a revolution, but nobody was there. In fact, it was really the epoch, and nobody knew about it, from this generation, when the Bretton Woods gold standard was abandoned and the ARPANET was privatized, meaning the precursor of the internet. And finally, in a major lawsuit against IBM, the software trade was established, creating something like a rift between hardware, software, which is nothing but I spoke of the decapitation of the king happening again, like hardware, software being. From then on, capital no longer resided in capitals, and a shift occurred, giving rise to a new intellectual continent of the mind, which we express with the term digital natives, like newborn, like guys on a new continent, etc. For a long time, the baby boomers were the beneficiaries of this movement, but it's becoming increasingly clear that we're really dealing with a political class lacking the necessary alphabet to understand the revolution they instigate, or they even not realized which was happening. Meaning, being digital analphabets while like celebrating themselves like the big heroes of revolution, etc. The revolution was there, but nobody was there.
Yeah, I think we have. This is the danger. This is the problem. We have the wrong tools today because, in very simple language, it is not 1965. It's not 1975. It's not even 1985. We need new tools, and we're stuck. And this is the problem, and I think it is dangerous. We've inherited. This is why I don't blame the boomers. I say that in my book. I don't blame them because in the 1960s they felt they had the wrong tools. Everything you've just been talking about, the wrong intellectual tools, the wrong Weltenschaft, the ideology, the wrong worldview. So they changed it. They changed everything to fit their experience, their needs, their desires for living in this affluent society in the 1960s and 70s. They changed everything. And that's fine. I think they're entitled to do that. Every generation is entitled to do that. But we're stuck. And I just don't really see anything. We kind of need a baby boomer rebellion again, but a new one. I don't see where that's coming from. But you're right. I think we don't have the tools. The map we have does not relate to the terrain. We've got the wrong map.
Yeah, we do. In our conversations, Martin and I keep coming back to the attention economy, which is where we're at now, which, after all, is the decisive currency of contemporary journalism. And knowing that sex and crime are the key factors that make clickbait possible, it's become clear how we've ended up in a limbo economy. Could it be that what you blame boomers on is nothing more than a consequence of this development?
Yeah, I would probably push back. I'm going to say no, because I think what you're describing is an eternal feature. If you go back to Roman times, the Roman rulers believed in bread and circuses to keep the people entertained.
Okay.
Gladiators, people killing each other, men versus lions. And so there's always been this kind of clickbait thing going on, the opiate of the masses. I mean, yes, it's true. I'm not trying to deny that we're kind of saturated with, billions of websites and blogs and news and so on. I don't know. I'm a little skeptical about that, because I think although there is a lot of noise, that's what you're describing, just huge amount of noise, a lot of it is actually repetitious. A lot of it repeats. I don't know. I think if you go back to, say, 1800 and you imagine a farmer somewhere in England or Germany or anywhere, and how does he get his news and his information? He goes to the market and he sits down with his friends and they talk, and someone's got a rumor and someone's heard something. And he goes home and says, I don't know what to believe. Everyone's got a different point of view, and he reads some things in the paper. And if you go back to a little bit more modern, once you get to the era of newspapers and so on, there's always been tabloid newspapers and stories of crime and murder, Jack the Ripper.
Sure.
We love that. So I think that's always been there. So I'll slightly push back on that one, I think.
Like you, I worked in public broadcasting, albeit in Germany, in the more aesthetic field, which implied certain artistic freedoms. And naturally, most of the editors, as boomers, were on a mission to save the world. But by that time, they were already quite disillusioned. There was a strange development at the end of the 80s, because people realized that they had maneuvered themselves into irrelevance with public education broadcasting. They resorted to quota ratings. I still remember the discussions I had with my editor. I told him that the Society for Consumer Research was a Nazi foundation, and in a sense confirmed Goebbels' ingenuity that only 10% indoctrination is necessary for stabilizing political power, while the rest should be entertainment. Translating this into a stratagem, can we say that the revolutionaries had turned into neoliberal market fetishists, or even more bluntly, that they have paved the way for the infantilization of the broadcasting program? Taking your psychogram, could we understand the move into ratings as an attempt to maintain boomer exceptionalism, the privileges they had won after the long march through the institutions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I want to pick out, you used the word infantilization. I think that's a problem because I teach young people and I see too much of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm amazed at how I'm fascinated by that. The boomers were rebellious and violent, mm-hmm. in 1968 you talked about. Mm-hmm. Yet when the boomers became elderly and old, they don't want to see that in young people. And I interpret that as saying, well, the baby boomer generation demonized old people. Hope I die before I get old. And the whole generation gap.
Yep.
They demonized old people when they were young. And it seems that they're kind of, to some extent, demonizing young people when they're old. So I think that is an issue. And I try to do everything I can to get sort of self-confidence back into young people. But yeah, I'm very troubled by what you say is the infantilization of young people and the kind of safety culture and their lack of self-confidence to have views.
We had a very interesting conversation with Catherine Liu, and Catherine Liu is teaching like film at like an American Californian university, etc. And she wondered, she was really amazed because she was showing some film noir stuff from the early 60s, Truffaut and the like, to her students, and their students were totally flabbergasted, because speechless even, like, how could this story be so slow and so long? Because they were just used to like this. Do you see that in your students too, like a attention span kind of shrinking?
Yes, I do, and we talk about that a lot. We've been talking about it this week in the office here at the university. I try and push back on it. Maybe I'm in denial. Maybe I think that and people are lazy. It's back to this infantilization, isn't it? If you treat people as kids, if you treat people as children, you will infantilize them. Yeah. If you treat people, so if you only show people, 30-second TikTok videos of cats and things, then they're going to watch it. So I like to think that that there are ways out of it. That's a bit depressing. I might be in denial about that, but it's a big problem. I just want to say one other thing, because you also talked, didn't you, about the maintaining the sinecures, and I think we are in a kind of ancien regime before the revolution period.
Yes.
I think we're blocked, and I don't really see any answers. I think any attempts to reform this system that we've built up, I don't have any answers. I mean, I'm not political, but it feels we're in the ancien regime, in the decades leading up to the French Revolution, when people wanted to change things. Louis XVI wanted to change the system, but it's just blocked. All these self-interest groups wherever you look.
Petrified.
So if you were a science fiction author who decided to write a story about a journalist in the late 21st century, no less, as a kind of Watergate story, what would it be about?
I love that question. Yeah, what an amazing question. So I'm going to say that it's going to be a kind of thriller and a sort of police journalist thriller. We're a journalist. We kind of live in a world where other views are not tolerated. It's very, very one-sided. Impartiality doesn't exist, and there's only the official kind of news. And there's a murder, and a journalist and a police officer go to the scene, and they find this apartment, and it's the dead body of an old man, and the apartment's been ransacked, but nothing appears to be missing. The money there, all the technology, nothing's been taken. And so as the novel progresses, the journalist starts to discover clues and it turns out that the old man had a secret, something that he was hiding, and that the people who murdered him and ransacked it had links to the government. So the plot goes on, and the search for this thing, and eventually the journalist finds it, and it's a data file that's quite old. Blows the dust off. He finally finds it. He's being hunted by the government agents. And he puts it into a machine that can play this old format of data. And what he discovers is all the ex nihilo podcasts.
Which is funny.
Including this one, where we talk about impartiality and truth, and the government is so frightened. The government is so frightened of your heretical ideas that they are part of the bad, but they've survived, and that's how it ends.
That's a wonderful story. Dear Graham Majin, thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you.
That's a beautiful ending.
Thank you very much.